It's a Tuesday night, nothing special, and you're scrolling through your phone in bed when you hear it. That sound, you know the one. That grinding metallic scraping noise coming from your car that definitely wasn't there yesterday. And immediately, your stomach drops. Not because you don't know what it is, but because you know exactly what it is. Something expensive. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, doing math in your head. Checking account, maybe 400? Credit card has some room, but that payment's already going to hurt next month. Savings? What savings? And suddenly, you're wide awake at 11:47 p.m., calculating whether you can make it to Friday without driving, wondering if your cousin still knows that mechanic, thinking maybe if you just ignore it, maybe it'll fix itself. It won't fix itself. You know that. But for a moment, pretending feels like the only option you have. Here's the thing. If that scenario made your chest tighten even a little bit, you're not alone. You're actually in the majority. And I don't mean that as some throwaway comfort. I mean, statistically, mathematically, provably, most people in this country are one unexpected expense away from genuine financial crisis. My name is Fox, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. Not just the mechanics of it, but the psychology, the patterns, the weird emotional relationship we all have with our bank accounts that nobody really talks about. I think about why some people seem to float through financial setbacks while others get completely derailed by them. And honestly, the more I dig into it, the more I realize that the problem isn't what most people think it is. Today, we're going to talk about that statistic, the one that says 59% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency expense. We're going to look at why that number is so stubbornly high, what's really going on beneath the surface, and this is the part that actually matters, what you can do about it, even if you feel like you're starting from zero. Because here's what I've learned. The path out of financial fragility isn't usually about making more money, at least not at first. It's about understanding why you're stuck in the first place. Let's start with the number itself, because I think we gloss over it too quickly. $1,000. That's not a new car. That's not a down payment on a house. That's not even a particularly fancy vacation. That's a timing belt, a root canal, an emergency vet visit when your dog eats something he shouldn't have, a broken water heater in February. $1,000 is the cost of regular life going slightly wrong. And yet, when Bankrate runs their annual survey, they've been doing this for years now, they consistently find that somewhere between 56% and 63% of Americans say they couldn't cover an unexpected $1,000 expense using cash or savings. They'd have to use a credit card, borrow from family, take out a loan, or just not pay it. Now, you might hear that and think, well, people are just bad with money. And look, I get why that's the easy conclusion. It's clean. It puts the problem somewhere specific. It lets us feel like there's a simple solution. Just be better, make a budget, stop buying coffee. But here's where it gets complicated. Because when you actually look at who can't handle these emergencies, it's not just people making minimum wage. It's not just young people who haven't figured things out yet. It includes teachers, nurses, office managers, people with college degrees, people with houses and cars and retirement accounts. It includes people who, from the outside, look like they're doing fine. So what's going on? This is something I think about a lot, and it's going to sound obvious once I say it, but I think it needs to be said anyway. Income is not the same thing as stability. We have this cultural assumption that more money equals more security. And on some level, sure, that's true. It's a lot easier to save when you have extra at the end of the month. But the relationship between income and emergency preparedness isn't anywhere near as straightforward as we pretend. There's actually research on this. Studies show that as people earn more, their spending tends to rise almost in lockstep. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it's brutally effective at keeping people in financial precarity regardless of their paycheck. You get a raise, you upgrade your apartment, new job, new car, promotion, time to renovate the kitchen, and none of that is necessarily irresponsible in isolation. That's what makes it so insidious. Each individual decision makes sense, but the cumulative effect is that you end up making $90,000 a year and still living paycheck to paycheck, still panicking when the car makes that noise, still lying awake doing math at midnight. I knew someone, and I'm being vague here deliberately, but this is a real person, who made over 6 figures and had less than $500 in savings. They had a beautiful apartment, a leased luxury car, went on nice vacations, and when their company did layoffs, they were about 3 weeks away from not making rent. Income feels like security, but it's not security. Security is the ability to absorb a shock without your life falling apart. Okay, so here's where we need to talk about something a little uncomfortable. Because yes, systemic factors matter. Wages haven't kept up with costs, healthcare is a nightmare, housing is insane in most cities. All of that is true and important. But there's also a psychological component to why emergency funds are so rare. And I think we need to be honest about it. Human beings are terrible at preparing for abstract future problems, like genuinely bad at it. Our brains evolved to deal with immediate threats. The tiger in front of us, not the potential tiger that might show up in 6 months. And building an emergency fund requires you to take money that could improve your life right now and set it aside for a disaster that might never happen. That's a hard sell. Emotionally, it feels like losing. There's a concept in behavioral economics called hyperbolic discounting. Basically, it means we disproportionately value things we can have now over things we might have later. $100 today feels more valuable than $110 next month, even though mathematically waiting is the better deal. And this isn't a character flaw, it's how we're wired. But it means that saving for emergencies requires actively fighting your own psychology, and that's exhausting, especially when you're already stressed about money, especially when you're already tired, especially when that new thing you want is right there and the emergency fund is just a number in an app. Here's something that I think gets underestimated in conversations about financial resilience: the compounding effect of not having savings. When you don't have an emergency fund and something goes wrong, you have to borrow. Credit card, personal loan, payday loan, whatever. Now you're not just dealing with the original expense, you're dealing with interest on that expense, which means you have less money next month, which makes it even harder to save, which means the next emergency hits you even harder. This is the debt spiral, and once you're in it, it's incredibly difficult to climb out. Let me give you some numbers, because I think this is important. Say you put a $1,000 car repair on a credit card with 24% APR, which is pretty typical these days. If you can only afford to pay $50 a month toward it, it takes you about 24 months to pay it off, and you end up paying around $1,260 total. You paid $260 for the privilege of not having cash. Now multiply that by every emergency over 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime. People who start without savings don't just stay without savings. They actively lose ground. The system extracts wealth from them through interest, fees, and penalties. And yeah, I know that sounds dramatic, but that's literally how it works. At this point, you might be wondering why I haven't just told you to make a budget and track your expenses. And the reason is that I think that advice is kind of broken. Don't get me wrong, budgeting can help. Knowing where your money goes is valuable. But the way budgeting is usually taught treats it like a willpower problem. Like if you just try hard enough, you'll magically stop spending money on things. The problem is that willpower is a limited resource. You can't white-knuckle your way through every financial decision forever. Eventually, you get tired or sad or stressed, and you spend money you didn't plan to spend, because spending money feels good in the moment, and feeling good is a basic human need. What actually works, and there's good research on this, is automation. Making the right choice, the default choice. Setting up automatic transfers to savings so you never have to decide to save. Putting your emergency fund in a separate account, preferably at a different bank, so it's not staring at you every time you check your balance. The goal isn't perfect discipline. The goal is building a system that works even when you don't. Here's something I genuinely believe. The first $1,000 is the hardest money you'll ever save. Not because it's the most money, but because you're building the habit from nothing. You're fighting inertia. You're proving to yourself that you can do something you've never done before. So how do you actually start? First, start smaller than you think you should. Seriously, $50, $25, whatever you can do without dramatically changing your life. The psychological win of watching that balance grow is more important than the actual number in the early stages. Second, make it automatic. I said this already, but I'm saying it again because it's that important. Set up a recurring transfer for the day after you get paid. Even if it's tiny, the money moves before you can talk yourself out of it. Third, give it a purpose. Emergency fund is abstract. Car repair fund or peace of mind account or no more 2 a.m. panic fund, those feel real. Name it something that reminds you why you're doing this. Fourth, protect it fiercely. This is not your vacation fund. This is not your I had a bad week fund. This is your the world is falling apart and I need to know I can survive fund. The only acceptable withdrawals are genuine emergencies, And look, I know this sounds basic. I know you've probably heard versions of this before, but sometimes the basic stuff is the stuff that actually works. You know, the fancy financial strategies don't matter if you can't absorb a $1,000 shock. Once you have that initial cushion, and it might take months, it might take longer, that's fine. The question becomes, what next? The conventional wisdom is 3 to 6 months of expenses. And honestly, that's a reasonable target. But I want to offer a slightly different framing. Instead of thinking about months of expenses, think about months of runway. How long could you survive if everything went wrong at once? If you lost your job and your car broke down and your landlord raised your rent, most people, when they really do the math, realize their runway is measured in days, not months. And once you see that, you understand why financial anxiety is so pervasive. You're not paranoid. You're accurately assessing a precarious situation. The goal of building savings isn't to become rich. It's to buy yourself time. Time to find a new job without taking the first desperate offer. Time to get a second opinion on that car repair. Time to make decisions from a place of stability rather than panic. That's what money is, really. It's time. It's options. It's the ability to say no when you need to. Yes, individual choices matter. Yes, building an emergency fund is possible for most people, even on modest incomes. Yes, the strategies I've talked about actually work. But also, we live in a system that makes financial fragility almost inevitable for a huge portion of the population. Wages have been stagnant for decades, while housing, healthcare, and education costs have exploded. Safety nets have been shredded. The very idea that individuals should have to save their way out of systemic precarity is, on some level, kind of absurd. I don't say this to be defeatist. I say it because I think it's important to hold both truths simultaneously. You can take responsibility for your own situation and acknowledge that the game is rigged. You can build your emergency fund and advocate for a better system. These aren't contradictions. The goal is to survive and thrive within the system we have while working towards something better. That's not hypocrisy. That's just being practical about a complicated reality. If you're part of that 59%, I want you to know something. You're not broken. You're not bad with money. You're a normal human being navigating an abnormally difficult financial landscape with a brain that wasn't designed for long-term planning. But you can change your situation, not overnight, not dramatically, but incrementally, steadily, in ways that compound over time. Start with one small automatic transfer. Protect it like it matters, because it does. Watch it grow slowly and let that growth change how you think about yourself and your possibilities. The goal isn't perfection. The goal isn't becoming some kind of financial guru who never makes mistakes. The goal is resilience. The ability to absorb a shock without your whole life falling apart. The ability to hear that grinding noise from your car and think, okay, this is annoying, but I can handle it. That's worth pursuing. That's worth the discomfort of change. And look, I know that a YouTube video isn't going to solve your financial problems. I know that knowing what to do and actually doing it are very different things. But maybe this is the nudge you needed. Maybe this is the thing that gets you to set up that automatic transfer tonight. Before you forget, before you talk yourself out of it. You don't have to be part of that statistic forever. You can be the person who's ready,